Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you all today. I don't know where in the world you are dialing in from. For me, it's a nice and early 6:30 a.m. So it's not the warmest and sunniest outside yet, but I'm really excited that this is how I get to start my day. So I am going to start off by giving a really brief 5-10 minute conversation about where I started and why I think mentorship is so critical for women, particularly women in global health and in global policy making. From there, I'm going to have the privilege of introducing two incredible leaders, Lucy and Umba, who are going to then have a nice conversation with me, where of course we'll be answering your questions and hearing some of your comments. I'm going to start with a little bit of brief history for those of you who don't know me. I was born and raised in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, a city where a lot of people will tell you they have heard about it only after you have told them where it is. And I moved to Libya when I was 15. It was there that I started an organization called the Voice of Libyan Women when I was 21 in 2011 at the end in my final year of medical school. Fast forward a couple of years, and I had been asked to advise the UN Security Council on issues of women, peace, and security, which was a core focus of my organization in Libya. And I also went on to help produce and advocate and continue to be appointed advocate for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I'm also a UN high-level commissioner for health, employment, and economic growth. So I'll start with a little bit of an anecdote about why I think mentorship is so critical. And then I'm going to delve a little bit into what I actually think it can do for us as a whole, as a collective community. When I was 22, I believe, I had gone to my first really big meeting at the UN. And when you go to a really big meeting, they etch your name into this like wooden plaque, and it's very fancy and you feel very special. And so I walked in, having had prepared for the past 2 weeks, as I'm sure you're all very well versed with. When you are a woman, by default, you're preparing twice as much. But when you're younger, add to it when you're a minority woman, you just kind of want to make sure that you can never be put on the spot and be asked a question that you don't know the answer to. And so that's exactly what I did. I could answer any question that anybody was going to throw at me. I had notes. I color-coded my notes because I am a type A personality. A fact anybody who knows me will tell you. And I walked into the room earlier than most of the other colleagues. And there's this huge table, and there was my name. And I have never been, like, there are moments where my friends jokingly tell me to sit in the moment a little bit. And I did. This was back in the days of, remember the Motorola Razr flip phone? And instead of our fancy like full screen phones now. So I sat in my seat and I took my picture, and I was really proud. I started laying out my papers as you do, even poured myself a cup of water from the carafe, and a young intern, who I would say was a little older than me, came up to me. And she said, "Excuse me, miss, that's Dr. Murabit's seat. And I hear he's quite difficult. So I recommend you go and sit in the back." With the others, and she actually specifically said with the other interns. And I was like, oh. And I don't know how many of you have had this moment where you've been like in an argument or you've been in a situation, and instead of doing what you think your natural tendency would be to do, you kind of just like pick up your things and you walk away. And then you spend I've spent the better part of 10 years, but you spend the next, the drive home, the shower the next morning, your breakfast, thinking about what you would have said in that moment. And so in that moment, I was just embarrassed and humiliated. And I am sure many of you have gone through the same experience of feeling like you have worked so hard to be somewhere, or you are so deserving to be there. And somebody with the slightest comment puts you in your place. So it didn't come to mind for me to be like, yeah, I am Dr. Murabit. Not once. I picked up my books, and I went and I sat in the back of the room. And it wasn't until my colleagues came in and started saying, Alaa, why are you sitting? Come on, come sit up in your seat, that I moved my things back. And I spent the next 2 hours, that entire meeting, Instead of focusing on all the awesome things I was going to say and all the incredible input I had, focusing on what I would say to that young woman. And it wasn't until 10 minutes before the end of the meeting where I kind of zoned into what the conversation was. And they were saying something so fundamentally wrong about how to engage with women locally that I was like, wait, how did we get here? And like, oh, you've been talking about this for 40 minutes. And I was like, wait, what? And following the meeting, the young lady came up to me and she said, I am so sorry. And I had so many things I was going to say. Like, believe me, I have 10 brothers and sisters. I had like a whole list. I had written down all the things I was going to tell her. But she came up to me and she said, I'm sorry. I never see people who look like me sitting at that table. So I naturally assumed you were in the wrong spot, and I didn't want you to feel embarrassed when they walked in. And it was the first time. I've grown up very rarely finding people who I view as role models in the global policy space, global security, and especially global health. I think it's very difficult for us to find that intersection of what we need. Yes, there are incredible women role models, but then, okay, so how about incredible women who have worked in your region or care about the issues you care about or look at things in the same way, or even if they don't share the same ideas, but they share a sense of wanting to cultivate and to create a relationship that is mutually reciprocal. And that was very hard for me to find. And so I immediately, started paying attention to a lot of my male colleagues. They would get these almost like silent, I'm sure you've all seen them, the silent pats in the back in the room. They'd come up with like completely wrong answer, and the person next to them would be like, good job, you tried. And you'd just be patting him on the back. And that you never really had anyone doing that for you. I didn't really have anyone doing that for me. And it would be I would be even more cautious of what I said, because I knew when I walked into a room, if I were the only woman, in particular, but a visible Muslim, a woman from my region, that I was representing not just me. I didn't have that privilege, but 1.8 billion Muslims and 3 or 4 billion women, and all of that is on you. And every time you kind of voice an opinion, you can see people in the room being like, oh, why did we invite her? Or, oh, it's good to have her here. And that your contributions and that your ability to really impact a conversation or a policy or a space, an industry, oftentimes is the decision maker between whether or not that industry will embrace more young women in that space, or more women in general in that industry. And so taking that on, I started looking at, how do I cultivate a space where when I walk into a room, it's not just me? Because I actually think one thing we don't say enough about mentorship is it's very much about power. There is a power dynamic when you have people in the room amplifying what you say, even if it's just nodding their head. Think about the last time that you were in a meeting or having a conversation with somebody and you had positive reinforcement when they were like, yeah. It makes you more confident in what you're about to say. And you know that you have allies in the room. You don't continue to look around to see how your information is being received. And it became really important to me before even becoming an advocate, actually, when I was 23, I felt like I had enough power in my space to say, okay, mandatory when you invite me, I'm going to bring with me 2 mentees. And I started my own mentorship program. For the most part, mentees and I connected remotely. Very rarely were they in the same city as me. And I would take on about 3 to 4 mentees a year. And my mentees have gone on to do things like create Lead for America, which is now a national nonprofit in the US to encourage people to run in local elections. They've gone on to create interfaith organizations in India and local village lawyer organizations in El Salvador. And they've gone on to do incredible things that I'm incredibly proud of. But more than that, I've learned more from my mentees than I have from most of my colleagues. And we really walked into the relationship saying, this is going to be reciprocal. If I'm not learning, I won't be as engaged. And if you're not learning, you're not going to be as engaged. And we also, very early on, something that I realized I could never really have a lot of tough conversations about was the personal stuff. I would find somebody who I could ask everything about professionally. But when I had questions about life timing and choices and, okay, moral questions and obligations that I felt I had to a particular issue or family. It was really hard to have those conversations with a lot of women that I found as mentors. And so from the beginning, I also said that is 100% on the table, because one thing that I don't think we talk about enough as women is how often all of our best laid plans are impacted by our social and our familial commitments. And that we need to be able to have those conversations, especially with our mentors, in the same way that our counterparts do. So that's a really brief on why I created my own mentorship program. And I think as Lucy and Umba and I and all of you get to have this conversation, we can talk about what it's really, the impact that it's made. I think, one of the things that I really hope we all get out of this conversation is what those broader efforts are when you do have mentorship and even sponsorship, right? When you do create and cultivate that relationship, why is it so powerful in actually transforming industries? And how does it really break down barriers to leadership? There's that famous saying, you can't be what you can't see, which I think is true. And it's even so much more powerful when you get to physically be there and see how someone leads and realize, to be super honest, it's not that hard. There are particular skills, there are particular things you tap into. For the most part, any of us can be leaders if it's cultivated and supported and amplified. And lastly, what I think is important as just to center this conversation in is I always assumed that mentorship was something everybody could tap into. And so I think we should also have a conversation really about that, the privilege of mentorship and how you can actually reach out to somebody. And if you're feeling like you're not in a space where somebody will respond to you, what to do. So some really practical realities on mentorship, because we all talk about it like it's the easiest thing in the world. And I've been in the position where I've gone up to somebody who I admire and have asked them, if they would be my mentor, and they've been like, yeah, I'm a little busy. I can go for coffee with you once. And really what that means and what we can all do about it. So thank you. And I am now going to bring on Lucy and Umba. So Lucy Wilson develops and facilitates youth programs in the UK and internationally, and is a gender and inclusion lead for the global youth development NGO Teach a Man to Fish. She has co-developed and currently co-leads 3 youth programs in London with children and Latin American young people to build their confidence and skills using mentoring, participatory video, and other activities. Umba Zalira is an African intersectional feminist who is passionate about sexual and reproductive health for girls and women. She's the co-founder of Growing Ambitions, an all-young women-led nonprofit community organization that provides comprehensive mentorship and support to teenage mothers in peri-urban areas. She is also the co-creator and co-host for Feministing While Malawian, a podcast exploring all issues affecting young women in Malawi from a feminist perspective. Thank you both for being here today. So, Umba, Lucy, can you kind of unpack for us, in your view, what it means, what mentorship means to you? Why don't we start there?
Yeah, so for me, mentoring is about working with somebody who potentially has some more expertise or experience in a certain area. I think it can come literally in all forms, from friendship, managers, teachers. It can be really informal, just someone you meet and you can have an informal mentoring session. But for me, it's about guiding someone along a path and being there to kind of be a sounding board for ideas, like wanting them to blossom and really just being there for them, but not in a kind of instructional way, much more of a two-way relationship where you're constantly asking questions and learning from each other, as you said. And I really do think it can grow into a friendship, as you said, with the personal aspects. That's what I think is so beautiful about mentoring, is that you kind of build this relationship of trust throughout it, and can be a really long-term friendship.
Umba?
I would agree with Lucy. And also I just want to highlight some of the misconceptions around mentorship, which is what I grew up believing as well, which is a mentor is supposed to be someone that's older than you, someone that has more expertise, are well established, have achieved so many other things. But it doesn't have to be someone that's older. It can be a peer, it can be your age mate, but there needs to be something that you want to learn from that person. You need to identify why you want them to mentor you, and be specific. So I see mentorship, yes, as a relationship, as a friendship, and as any other relationship or friendship, it needs to be intentional. Both parties need to put in effort. Both parties need to identify which areas they want to work on or how they can learn from each other and grow together. So there needs to be intention from both sides. And it's not the easiest thing. I agree with Alaa, because I guess every other person is drawn to these very big women leaders, and they are overwhelmed. There are a lot of young women that want to be mentored by them. So it's important then that you identify what are the areas of not familiarities, what are the similar things that you have in common. There are so many people that will approach them. What do you want from them? What do you need from them? That needs to be set on from like the first conversation you're going to have with them.
So you've both mentioned kind of the importance of having an effective reciprocal relationship, one that is built intentionally, one that is really built with the purpose of not delivering an output, but rather cultivating and supporting a leader. What are some effective, who are some potentially effective mentors, or what are some effective mentorship qualities that you've experienced in your own work and in your own lives?
Yeah, so for me, from my experience, is kind of running youth programs and mentoring programs literally with children. So last year I worked with a charity called Reach Out with 9 and 10-year-olds from marginalised communities in London. And each mentee had a mentor who were kind of university students. And from that experience, I've really learned a lot about what I think makes an effective mentor. And we did training with the mentors throughout that program. So there's kind of 3 key things that stick out in my mind. The first is building like a really strong, trusting relationship. And I think you can do that, especially with young people, but showing up and being consistent. So if your mentee reaches out to you, be there, respond to them, and make sure you definitely show up to those mentoring sessions. I think remembering details about them. So if it helps to take notes, and then in the next session, you can say, hi, how did that meeting go? Or how was that speaking opportunity that you were worried about? Because then that really makes you think, hey, this person cares about me. And then you want to open up more. The second thing for me, I think mentors should really be led by their mentees. Like each mentee is really individual and they're going to know what they want help with or what particular challenges they're facing. So asking loads of questions to make sure you understand and also pushing them to kind of think what they exactly think that they could do. And thirdly, it's kind of going the extra mile. So my mentor on my first day of my master's sent me a text saying, happy first day as an anthropologist. And it was such a small detail, but she'd done it 1 hour before my first seminar. I don't know even how she found that out, but it was just something that there I felt so supported. And again, it just builds that trust where I'm like, I do have someone that I can turn to if I've got some kind of queries.
And just to add to that, time. I think time is important. Put in time. If you need to write it down in your diary that you need to check on your mentee, write it down. Because then if you're creating time, then you're also creating consistency. So you know that you're going to check up on them every month. You can meet up if you want to meet up. Face-to-face interactions are great. But also check on them life outside the things that you are talking about. Because I think most of the times we think that if my mentor, I want them to mentor me, for example, about leadership, how can I be a young woman leader?
So I think we've lost Umba for a little bit. Is she showing up frozen for you as well, Lucy?
Yeah, she is.
Okay, so why don't I'll delve into the next question, and then if we get Umba back, which I'm hoping is soon, she can carry on from that answer. One of the best pieces of advice I was ever given around being a mentor or being a mentee, to be honest, is that you have to show up to show up. And I hold that very dear, not just now in mentorship, but in every space. It's become kind of the most critical thing I think about in any position, in any space, with work, family, friends, regardless of anything I'm participating in. I remember show up to show up. So both as a mentee, I think it's critically important to be present and to really go in with the same intentions, to say I'm coming in to learn, but I'm also coming in to teach and to share and to create this reciprocal relationship. So Lucy, what is your advice for actually seeking out a mentor? What practical advice can we give?
Yeah, so as we've kind of talked about, it can come in really informal ways like friends and teachers. But I think for me, again, there are kind of three ways that you can find it. One of them, which I think we'll talk about a bit more later, is formally within your institution or organisation, if you're lucky enough to have that as an option. Secondly, there are actually loads of mentoring programmes, as both Alaa and Umba have mentioned. I actually found one mentor just by Googling female mentoring, and we connected through that, which was amazing. But what I do think, which Alaa, you have touched on, for me, I think one of the most powerful ways is to really think about what you want mentoring in, and then think whether you know someone or you've met someone or you've heard someone speak who does seem skilled in that, or you really respect in that area, and reach out to them. Like you said, sometimes people will kind of disappoint you, but the worst that can happen is that they'll say no, and you might be really lucky because it's pretty flattering to be asked to be a mentor, and then just reach out to them and hope for the best. One thing I would say that I think it's really important to have some kind of personality match, because you're going to be opening up to this person. You want to have a trust and a kind of warmth, at least, so that you feel like you'll be able to open up to them. But yeah, I would really recommend your kind of personal networks and reaching out in that way to someone that you know you respect.
Yeah, some advice that I always give people who reach out to me, and even friends and family, is look at someone who you admire, honestly, whose qualities you admire. They don't have to be in the same field, but if you admire their qualities and you admire their style of leadership, chances are you're going to continue to admire how they exercise it as you're closer. Or you'll learn that you actually don't. And there's a lot more that goes into private leadership than it just simply looks from the outside. And the second thing that I think is really important is when you reach out to somebody and if they aren't available, I mean, the best lesson I ever got on learning to say no and recognizing when too much was on my plate was from a woman who told me, sorry, I can't mentor you. I just have so much going on and I'm really committed to current projects. And in her email, she told me it's important to know when you can say no. And that I could always reach out to her in the future. And I found that to be incredible because at the time I almost never said no. I was always worried about what that would say about me and about my commitment. And it was the first time I was like, no, you can actually show your commitment to issues by saying my plate is full. I think we are getting Umba back, which is fantastic. Perfect in time for my last question before going to the audience. Umba, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic. So before I head to the audience, I have one last question for you both, which is how can institutions in our field, in global health, really support mentoring and learning? It's not something that we're very well versed in. So how can we do better? And Umba, I'll start with you, given your work on sexual health and reproductive rights.
Thank you. So I think first of all, there needs to be intention. I think already there's a lot of mentorship that is already happening amongst team members, but there is need for the institutions to be very systematic about it and very intentional of what do we want these mentorships to cultivate. And also to build skills. I don't think it's as easy as for everyone else to approach someone to ask for help. So we need to be also deliberate about building those skills in our team members so that they're able to cultivate mentorships within or also outside the organizations.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Umba said. I think being intentional is really important. So as Reach Out kind of taught me, organizations need to create space for mentoring and time and systems to match mentees and mentors, so it becomes a kind of culture. So Reach Out was amazing. Even the CEO had a mentor, so it was kind of this entire culture of mentoring that everyone was going about it. And I think another thing that is really important is training and support for mentors. Some people it comes really natural, and they can kind of learn as they go, but everyone will face some challenges, and I think we can all grow as mentors and mentees. So I think having that training, allowing mentors to gain more from the process as well, would be an amazing way of supporting.
I completely agree. So we're going to now turn to audience questions. So please continue to send in your questions. And the first one I think will really resonate with everybody, which is how do you really overcome the obstacles, both mentees and mentors, of maintaining relationships and networking during and after the COVID pandemic? Are there any possible advantages to pursuing mentorship in the age of COVID-19? What do y'all think?
Yeah, well, I think maybe I just speak for myself, but I think we're all getting even more sick of technology than usual during COVID, because even the meetings that we used to have face to face are now over the screen. But technology luckily does give us, or a lot of us, great solutions to this. So I think there are some kind of interesting ways that we can do, like coffee breaks, where you'll both have a little mentoring session for a break from work. Or if you really do want a good gap from the screen, you could go for a walk and both plug into your headphones and go for a walk and mentor. And I think also just like those regular check-ins, like a quick WhatsApp message. I think some of those are the ways that we can continue to build those relationships during COVID, when mentoring is probably needed more than ever. And in terms of advantages, what we were talking about, it allows us to reach out potentially to more people who don't live close to us. We could use LinkedIn or just your personal networks to reach out to people, and have mentoring across countries.
Umba?
Just to add to that, I mean, I come from Malawi, where not every person has a smartphone, not everyone has access to WhatsApp. So I think also during this time, what we're learning is what are the privileges that we have, and how can we adapt and find other creative ways of connecting. So it's different ways, whatever will work for between the mentor and the mentee. Find ways that will work for both of you. If you can't access WhatsApp, find other ways, whether it's just a text or a phone call, but find ways. And also to just be kind to each other. Everyone else is going through this pandemic. You cannot expect that your mentor is going to remember that you had a meeting. Remind them, check in on them. So just also being very gentle and kind to each other. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have to say, I will, just speaking on my own personal behalf, it has been really difficult to maintain mentee mentorship relationships during COVID on a kind of, in the sense that, usually at the beginning of a mentorship with somebody, we pull out flat out because your mentor will never know. And you'll never know appreciate communication, or how you appreciate to be appreciated or recognized or incentivized, all of those different things, and what you really would love to learn in terms of hard and soft skills coming out of your mentorship. So I always advise people at the very beginning to sit down together, even if it's virtual, and talk about those things. And I found I feel so drained during this time that it's tough for me to feel as though I'm being a good mentor. And it was a mentee of mine who told me, you don't have to teach me policy writing, or you don't have to teach me about global health security. I'd really just love, maybe we could do a Netflix watch party. And I've never done a Netflix watch party with anybody in my life. But it was interesting because it was something that felt so far removed from our traditional way of connecting. And I felt relief, and it also allowed us to have a super interesting conversation about the documentary that we had just seen. And so I think finding different ways, but recognizing that, people hold space differently in this time. And it doesn't necessarily mean that person's not a fantastic mentor or a fantastic mentee, but you never really know what's going on in people's lives unless you ask, unless you show up. And sometimes people are not comfortable sharing that much of themselves. And that's all okay. So if this isn't the time, if you're like, I so believe in mentorship and I so want to mentor, but I'm overwhelmed, it's okay. Just take care of yourself. You cannot be a good mentor or a mentee if you feel like you're not getting through the day. You really can't. And so focus on yourself, and then really enter that space when you feel ready. So Ashley is asking all of the panelists, collectively your work reaches multiple continents. What specific cultural contexts do you have to be mindful of when you're approaching mentorship in different geographies? Umba, why don't we start with you?
I think first of all is just understanding what the context is for that area, and that's simply just asking questions to your mentee and other people in those communities, but also learning from other organizations that are doing similar work or other mentors that that are in those communities. So I think it's asking questions. It's only from asking questions that the limits or the context that you're working in.
Yeah, I would completely agree with them, but there we can only find out by asking questions, and maybe sit down and do a bit of research before, if you feel like that would be helpful, so that you are culturally sensitive, because that's really important about building trust, to actually understand where you're working and who you're working with and what particular issues might come up there. But I think communication is the key there, and being led again by the mentee. They can guide you through that. You can learn from them.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's important to always have the courage to say what you need, from that person in that moment, because it doesn't matter how fantastic your mentor is, and no one is a mind reader. And so when you do ask for exactly what you need, one of two things will happen. The person can deliver it, and it enriches the relationship and it actually really moves it forward, or you'll find out that they just don't have the capacity to deliver that. And in both scenarios, that is such a generous gift, because you know exactly where you are, and maybe this person can't operate in my cultural context, or no, this is the right person for me. So I always think you should always, it should never be an unbalanced power relationship in a mentorship. If it is, then it's not the right mentor. It really isn't. You should not feel uncomfortable or scared to be able to say, this is what I really need right now. Have the courage to say that, and then see what the response is. And this really leads us into our next question, because sometimes the person might say no. And so our next question from Indira is, saying no is always hard, particularly in a competitive environment. So how does one do it without coming across as an unwilling worker? Indira, as a woman in global health, I can tell you that is very true. So Lucy, how does one say no without coming off as unwilling or difficult, or all the things they'll probably say about us anyways?
Well, I actually really loved your example, Alaa, that you said about somebody you reached out to as a mentor, and she just came back in a really nice, honest, open way. So I think by starting saying, firstly, thank you so much for reaching out. I would really love to take this on, and it sounds like it would be a great thing. But at the moment, unfortunately, I just have too much on. You could list some of the things, but I don't think it's really necessary. I think women generally are kind of always doing so much to try and catch up and feel confident, that it's important that we look after ourselves or we'll go into burnout. So I think just being your kind, empathetic selves and being honest and communicating that, but letting people down gently in the way that Alaa described this person did, I think would be my advice.
Umba?
Yeah, I agree with Lucy, but also I think for me the first thing is, what kind of relationship have you built with your mentee where you are finding it hard to say no? First of all, I think it's also checking into that, that you are able to build a relationship or a space where you will not feel bad for saying no, and that your mentee will not take it as will not take it bad. So it's starting from there, and also saying no gently. As Lucy has said, it's okay to say no, but it's how you say no as well. If you can, which is what I try to do, is I say no, and then I refer them to someone else that can help them with the thing that they're asking for, someone else where they can get the information from. So it's saying, I can't help you now, but here's another person that can help, or here's another place where you can get the information.
I think that's absolutely fantastic. It is, the best advice I ever learned on how to say no was from someone saying no to me. I realized I have the permission to dictate where I dedicate my time, and sometimes my time dictates where I dedicate my time. And I remember when I have a 10-month-old daughter, and I was 8 months pregnant with her, traveling, or 7 months pregnant with her, had been traveling literally all year, and somebody approached me and said, I'd really love for you to mentor me. And I had to be honest and say, I'm having trouble mentoring myself. And the way the young woman approached the conversation with such grace and compassion for where I was. And so she came back and said, actually, I have 2 kids, and I'd love, if you just want to talk, I'd love to talk with you about it. And I have never felt, I can honestly say the empathy in that moment made me feel so seen, because she had approached me for professional mentorship and instead said, I have something I've gone through, and I can get where you'd like to just have a human conversation. And so I think sometimes when people do say no, it's okay to say, okay, well, if you need anything, I am here. Because it is a two-way street. Mentorship is a two-way street, and there's so much we can learn from each other. So assuming that the door is closed means, okay, that's the only type of relationship you can have with that person. If there's a way in which you can engage, and then maybe down the line, you can get back to that point where you're asking questions about, professional skills or networks or things that you really would love. Umba, why do you think?
Sorry, can I come in?
Of course, please.
I think for the same question, if we flip it, I think it's interesting. I think the question was asked from a mentor point of view, where your mentee is asking you and you say no, which I feel also there are power balances or imbalances in mentor-mentee relationships. So I think we should also talk about, how do mentees say no to their mentors? What does that look like? Because most of the times, especially in situations where your mentor is an older woman leader, a badass woman leader that you look up to, and they're asking you to do something and you're not in the space to do it, how do you say no as a mentee? I think that would be interesting as well to talk about from that point of view.
How do you say no, Umba?
I thought we were going to start with Lucy. To be honest, it was really hard. As an upcoming young woman leader, I found myself in places where I was overwhelmed and had said yes to too many things. So it was something that I had to learn to say no. Yeah, I think it's applying the same kindness and being gentle, but also realizing that there might be some pushback, and that you might be guilt tripped, and it's fine. Yeah, it's very hard, I would say, but yeah, that's what I did then.
Lucy, I'm going to send that question to you, because I will be honest, in my mentee days, I never had the ability, courage, or confidence to say no. So I'm also learning here.
No, I think it's definitely hard, but I think always when it comes to saying no, for me, the kind of keys to it are reflecting and communicating. So if somebody asks you something which you've realized you don't want to do or you can't do, trying to ask yourself, actually, why is it that you can't do that? Maybe sit down for a little bit and reflect on that, and then just communicating, as long as it's not rude. And but if it is, I actually have got 10 things to do this week, I really don't have time for it, just be honest with people, and people always respond so well to honesty. But yeah, it's definitely scary when you feel there's a power dynamic there to kind of open yourself up in that way.
Yeah, no, I can be honest in saying I would not have a personal answer for that. I did not feel comfortable saying no until well into when I was holding power. I was always worried, if I say no, they're going to say I'm difficult. They're not going to create space for me. I'm not going to be at the table. And a huge part of it, and some people say, well, there's always imposter syndrome. And I actually don't think it's that. I do think, especially in spaces like global health, I think it's important for us to recognize that we work in cultures and ecosystems. And unfortunately, this is a culture and an ecosystem that, that doesn't prioritize or recognize or appreciate women's work to the same level as it does men's work. And and so I'm excited for when people say no now, because it means that we've created a safe enough environment where they don't worry about reciprocation, or they don't worry about sabotage to their career, or they don't worry about being labeled as difficult, etc. But saying no in and of itself, in my opinion, is often a privilege for women. And it is heavily defined by if you are a woman of color, or if you're a minority woman in the room, or if you're only women in the room, you're always so much more cautious. So I think it's wonderful to be able to create the space where you feel comfortable saying no. And mentorship can be a huge part of that, having more people in the room, having a confident network of people supporting you, so you get that strength from somewhere. But I will caveat this with saying, especially in global health, saying no is a privilege. And that's something, that's something that is awful, but it's a reality of where we work. And I hope that we can change that. But for all the young professionals, I don't want everybody showing up to work tomorrow being like, no, I'm not. And then being surprised when the feedback is not incredibly positive. So I'm going to lump a couple of questions here together. And, a question that comes back, and Umba, I'm going to ask you this first, is why is it so critical, or is it critical on having women as mentors? Why, is there a difference between having female and male mentors, or what's the importance of potentially having both?
I think it's important, first of all, because as we say, that mentorship leads to friendship and ultimately building sisterhood of some sort. And that is needed in the leadership spaces, in global health and in any other field. You need someone that is like you, has been through something that you're going through, that you can talk to. And that also speaks into the importance of diversity in mentorship. If it's something that we're trying to do at an institution level, we need to be mindful of, do we have representation of all the diversities that women bring to the table, so that someone else shouldn't feel like, oh, I can't approach that woman that has been put as a mentor for this institution because they don't look, sound like me. So it's important because you need that as a young woman leader, or as a woman leader. You need that. You need someone that you can talk to, someone that you can bounce off ideas or challenges or just vent with about things that you're going through. I've never really had a male mentor. I can speak to that. I'm very deliberate and intentional about my mentors, so I want them to be female, just like me. So yeah, you need it. You just need someone to bounce off your ideas or the things that you're going through.
Yeah, someone to create that space so that you have that comfort. Lucy, how about you?
Yeah, I definitely agree with them that working with a mentor who looks like you or has a similar identity to you can be really powerful. And I've worked with queer youth in the past that have really appreciated working with me as a kind of openly queer woman, because they can see somebody and actually speak to someone who has been through, obviously not exactly the same experience, but similar ones. However, I do think male mentors can be kind of an active way of performing allyship. So rather than being like, I'm a feminist, actually actively performing, being a real ally by kind of using their privilege, sharing their privilege, speaking up, as you said, in meetings, and actually backing your mentee. And obviously, as women, we can't exactly mirror some of the male privilege, but we can learn. I think you said, Alaa, when you were in one of the group, you were in one of your meetings, you were watching how some of the men kind of hold themselves and perform. And if male mentors can create a space where women feel safe to share, then I think learning some of those ways and sharing the privilege is how we start to break down some of these differences in power.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. I agree with both of you. When I actively started seeking out mentors, I sought out women women who looked like me. I couldn't find very many. So I started seeking out other women. And when I started mentoring, most of my mentees were women. And it was actually probably one of the most powerful mentor relationships, as well as some of the most powerful mentee relationships I have had have been men. And it was my dad at one point said, "Why do you only mentor women? Men can learn so much from you." And so I started saying, "Okay, yeah, that's true. I'm gonna mentor young men." And one of the most powerful mentors I have ever had is an older gentleman who is from my region, but would really, something as simple as like, "Alaa, your email signature is too long. You don't have to put every single title you've ever held. It looks like it's too much." And I was like, "Really?" And so the little things that he would say, and it wasn't a formal mentorship relationship, but it was learning. And honestly, sometimes I now go and read his emails, and I make sure I take out all of the things in my email that make me sound very like, soft, like, just, and I think, and I take them all out. And so that's been helpful. And that brings me to my next question. Marissa's asking, what are other places that we can find guidance if your mentor doesn't necessarily have the knowledge you're looking for? And to piggyback on that, I think it's important to kind of give the inverse, which is Delise is asking, how do you approach working with a mentee who doesn't necessarily know what they need? So for example, teenagers or somebody who might be early off in their career who doesn't necessarily know what skill sets they want to learn yet.
So to give an example of that, last year I worked with a 10-year-old, so she's, I guess, bordering on being a teenager, and she'd been in the Reach Out project the year before and actually ended up stopping. I think she actually might have thrown a chair at her project leader, who's the person in my role. I started working one-on-one with her, and at the first I kind of thought it was a confidence issue that she wanted to work on. She was very resistant to participate in pretty much any activity, but it was a case of showing up and building that trust. So after a few sessions, she started to actually kind of open up a bit more to me. And I said, "So what do you want to work on?" And at the beginning she said, "Nothing, I don't know." She wasn't really very willing to take part. And then she said, after a few sessions, "I want to work on my anger." And I was quite surprised, even with the chair situation. So I actually, it even kind of speaks to the other question about signposting. I did some research the next week about anger management for young children, and the next session spent some time kind of going through some behavior anger management techniques with her. And we actually did some role play where I annoyed her in the ways that she said caused her anger, and she learnt and practiced responding to that. And by the end of the sessions, after about 16 weeks, she really had grown a lot in confidence. And at the beginning of the session, she'd bounce up to me, give me her phone so she doesn't get distracted. And she actually said to my manager when she came to observe a session, she asked her to apologize to the project leader for the year before because she feels so bad. And to hear a 10-year-old reflect in that way just shows how much you can grow. So I think it's a case of, as you keep saying, Alaa, showing up, being consistent, believing in that person and seeing them. Because if I had just been like, "Okay, you don't want to work on anything," and given up, then we wouldn't have seen her grow in confidence, but she did all by herself. But yeah, I think that would be kind of my answers.
So I have a few very important questions that are coming in from the audience, and these are getting real good, and we only have about 5 minutes left. So I am going to ask 3. And feel free to pick and choose what you want. But these are 3 questions that I think we really have to answer before these 5 minutes are up. The first is, does mentorship necessarily need to be one-on-one? The second, from Carrie, is there's been discussions that mentorship should be a win-win relationship. Do y'all agree? And the third, and this is the one where I feel is an incredible question from Shraddha, I think. How does one trust a mentor who has had different privileges or better privileges than a mentee? For context, I'm a brown woman and looking at reaching out for help to get more confident with my thoughts and ideas at a table full of white men. How do I trust a white woman mentor to understand my context and guide me appropriately? And I think really, how do we, even as we had been speaking earlier about having male mentors, right? How do we trust people who don't necessarily share a lot of our same challenges or privileges? And then, of course, the last one that I think we need to answer is looking for mentorship in someone you deeply admire can feel very far-reaching, especially if you're very early in your career or as a student. Who should we be aiming realistically for mentors, especially if you're at an early stage? So I will turn it over, Umba, first to you.
Okay, I'll go with the first one first. I don't know if it was the first one. I don't think it necessarily have to be one-to-one, mentor-mentee. It can be 1-5 if the mentor can has the time and the capacity to mentor that many people. So it can be more than that. And I think it's something that we do as well at Growing Ambitions. With the girls and young women that we work with, it's not one-to-one. So they're a group, and they're a group of the girls, and we have mentors that mentor them in groups. But also we encourage them that if they wanted to be one-on-one because they're going through something specific, then that can happen. But also just encouraging the mentees to also mentor each other, to also look out for each other. That works well as well. About the looking for mentorship, someone you deeply admire, I naturally shun away from that. I don't know if I'll be the right person. I get really, really anxious and scared of approaching like really big, amazing people and asking them to mentor me. But again, I think we'll go back to the point that I made at the beginning. What do you want them to mentor you on? Because sometimes it's also just because they're big and you admire them and you want to cultivate a relationship with them. That's fine. But is there something specific that you want them to mentor you on? But also being mindful then that everyone else is attracted to the same thing that you're attracted to them. So do they have the time to mentor you? Because if they don't, then you might feel rejected and you might feel like it didn't work out for you, or they were bad because they didn't check up on you. So it's balancing all those things out for me, I would say.
Yeah.
For the last one, I would. Oh, should I? Oh.
Just a couple of minutes. I'm going to turn to Lucy and let her answer a couple of questions as well. Thanks so much.
Yeah, so the question about, I think I should not take up the space about Guy. I'm a white woman, so I think other people can answer that question better than me. The only thing I would say is, coming from that position as a white woman, I would just acknowledge my privilege and make it really obvious and say, I can't understand some things, I can do my best, listen and ask questions. But I think you two would be able to give better advice on that. And what was the other question? Sorry, can't remember. Win-win. I think a mentee-mentor relationship should always be a win-win, unless it's going horribly wrong. I think mentors can always learn from mentees. They can learn from them, and they can also learn about themselves and be better leaders through it.
Awesome. So in the 1 minute we have left, Umba, I would love for you to actually tap into that question about really a mentorship that is, where mentee and mentor come from completely different levels of privilege. But I would also love for each of you in about 30 seconds to close with, how can we as individuals advocate for our organizations to prioritize mentorship, either informally or formally, and doesn't need to be through your organization or your place of work. So Umba, I go to you, and then Lucy, last words from you.
Great. So for that question, I think for me, what would be important is first checking if outside the space that you want the person to mentor you of, are they able to check their privilege? How are they able to comprehend or talk about issues about race and everything else? Because that would then show you whether they will be the right person or not. Because if they're not able to check their privilege, if they're not able to understand your context and where you're coming from, they might not be the right person to do that. And maybe that would also be then a place where we can start looking at, are there male mentors that you can look for in the same organization or the same space, or even outside that same organization? Is there someone else that is in the similar situation as you, or the similar organization where you can tap into? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a person that you're working with.
Lucy?
Yeah, so just really to quickly answer your question, I think it doesn't have to always be with your within your organization, but I think if you can build up a community of support for mentoring, after hearing this and after speaking to other people who have seen it, the power that it can have, then go to managers and try and get them on side, as all advocacy movements can build in this by drilling up support.
Thank you both so much for joining us all here today. It has been a wonderful conversation, and I will really quickly close out this 1 minute by giving my own. I think a mentorship should be a win-win. If it's not, then it doesn't make sense to be there. And to add to that, I think that a win-win can mean multiple things. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're gaining, work skills all the time, but it does mean that you feel heard and you have a space and a person that you can go to and share your ideas and thoughts with, and that space is safe. That doesn't necessarily mean you'll always agree. And if you come from different backgrounds and different levels of privilege, you might not even understand one another sometimes, but it means that you have a space of trust where you can go and you can come out of that relationship having built confidence, having built a sense of leadership, and having built a sense of power, I think. And that's what mentorship should be at the end of the day. It should be powerful. It should not, it should tap into the agency that you already have. And if you feel like your mentor, for whatever reason, can't do that, or you feel like your mentee, isn't able to also reciprocate, then my biggest recommendation is find people who can. And mentors are so informal. The people who have mentored me most, from my mom to my neighbor, are people who I don't think would ever call themselves my mentor, but I've learned so many else from. So also look into your own network. Look at friends you admire. Look at people in your own space, people at work, and most great things start off, in my opinion, at least, a lot of great things start off pretty informally. And you can tell somebody, I've learned so much from you these past couple of months. I would love if we could turn this into a formal mentorship relationship. We are through our session, and I am so grateful both to you, Lucy, and Umba, for really opening up. I do think powerful mentorship is compassionate and it is filled with grace, but it's also filled with vulnerability. And I appreciate all the work you're both doing. For all our audience members, please click on the main stage tab at the top of your browser page for the plenary panel. It will begin after a 5-minute break. Thank you all for joining us today. Take care.